Good afternoon, everyone. This is the first week of the academic year 2022-2023, and I want to wish you a very successful academic year, also at the Minerva Center. And we are also happy to host in this first seminar of the Minerva Center for the study of the rule of law under extreme conditions, the new class of MA Studies in Disaster Management, who are joining us in this seminar. Good luck with your program. Have a great success. And I want to welcome also the newcomers to the Minerva Center, and we'll have a proper physical meeting together very shortly. I want to welcome our speaker today, Dr. Marco Longobardo from the University of Westminster in London. We had about a month ago a very interesting one-day conference on the Ukraine crisis, hosting the Ukrainian ambassador and various experts. And Marco was supposed to take part in this conference, but he couldn't make it at the end. So we are very happy to have him here on our seminar. Marco is a lecturer in international law and focused on the use of armed force in occupied territory, a very close and timely and important topic in the Israeli context. And this research was also published as a book in Cambridge University Press in 2018, a book for which Marco also received very highly regarded prizes. But today, Marco will talk about war crimes in the context of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, and reflect on lessons from the Bosnia conflict some 20 years ago. Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Salzberger. Thank you very much to the organizers of this seminar and to students and colleagues who joined us today. And I would have loved to be in Haifa in person next time. It would have been my third time in Israel, but unfortunately I've never been able to visit Haifa. Today, I have some slides, so don't worry, especially to the students who have the misfortune of having me on the first day of the new term. I understand that's terrible, I'm sorry guys. But what I'm going to say is some words before starting with the slides. Today I'm going to talk about issue of international law that is a very old, I would say, long-standing issue. It's whether a state has the duty to prevent a genocide from occurring when that genocide is occurring outside the state borders. I will make a very clear example that it may be quite easy from a non-legal point of view. It's not that easy from a legal point of view. If there is a genocide while we're speaking in Lebanon, just within the boundaries of Lebanon, does Israel have a duty to intervene to prevent that genocide from occurring? That's the question. It's an old-standing question. It relates to the old idea of humanitarian intervention. Why we are talking about this today? For two reasons. One is the current Russian aggression against Ukraine. So this is the framework in which we are going to talk. I will share the slides. So why we are talking about this today? The quick answer would be because there is the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and in which Russia invoked a duty to prevent a genocide from occurring in eastern Ukraine. We are going to say some words on this allegation very soon. But there is also another reason, and the other reason is very, very, how can I say, easy. It is that exactly 15 years before Russia decided to launch its aggression against Ukraine, the International Court of Justice rendered the first judgment in the case between Bosnia and Serbia, in which the court said that a state has a duty to prevent a genocide from occurring in another territory. 26th of February 2007, the court said that Serbia wasn't legally responsible for the Srebrenica genocide, but nevertheless, Serbia had violated its duty to prevent an armed group operating in the area from committing that genocide. And this was a very important decision, very much commented in literature. It's one of my favorite decisions, honestly. I leave to you the judgment of why I like a decision on genocide, but that's for another occasion. But it is a very interesting decision from a legal standpoint, because the court said that you should have stopped, you should have prevented the stop of that genocide in another territory. But in the 15 years after that decision, still international lawyers have a huge number of doubts about what a state can do to prevent that genocide. So I work at the University of Westminster. I'm in charge with the academic events like this one at the University of Westminster. In December 2021, I started organizing an event for February 2022, saying we need to convene an event to reflect on which is the status of the law 15 years after the ICJ said, 15 years, the ICJ said, the state has a duty to prevent a genocide in another state. Because in my opinion, this is quite a dangerous development. It's useful, but at the same time dangerous because it can be manipulated. And I think Vladimir Putin wasn't happy with the idea that I had that event, because exactly two days before the anniversary, Russia invaded Ukraine with the aim of preventing a genocide. So I think that we have now even more, the need is even more, is higher than in the past to discuss on what a state can do in implementing its duty to prevent a genocide. So very quickly, which were the main features of the 2007 decisions? The court said that it's true that under the UN Genocide Convention, a state has a duty to not to commit a genocide, to punish individuals who are responsible for genocide, but nevertheless there is a third duty that is an autonomous duty of preventing genocide, and this duty is not restricted by territoriality concerns. So a state has a duty to prevent a genocide from occurring in the territory of another state. Oh my God, there is my intercom buzzing. Okay, I will ignore that. The court clarified that this genocide prevention should be done within the boundaries of international law, but without clarifying which are the actions that a state can undertake within the boundaries of international law to prevent that genocide. And finally, the court said something that I will explain in more details in 1 minute, that this is an obligation of conduct that is breached when, in fact, a genocide occurs. So 15 years after this, we have, as I told you, the invocation of the need to prevent a genocide in Ukraine as one of the aims of the special military operation launched by Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. I have used the Sofado language, official language adopted by Russia, because this is the legal basis offered by Russia to the UN Security Council and the International Court of Justice for its invasion. As an international lawyer, I have the duty to say that from what we know now, there is no genocide or threat of a genocide in eastern Ukraine by the Ukrainian government against any Russian-speaking minority. So the Russian allegations are totally baseless. And at the same time, we consider that this invasion is illegal, is an act of aggression. But in any case, 15 years after Bosnia versus Serbia, Russia invoked the duty to prevent a genocide from occurring in another territory as a reason to use armed force. And interestingly, as a response, in 2022, in February, Ukraine convened Russia before the International Court of Justice, again bringing the duty to prevent a genocide at the attention of the International Court of Justice. So we are in this 15-year span in which I didn't know before the invasion, but this issue is back to the International Court of Justice. I will not enter the details on what is going on now before the International Court of Justice. There is a pending case. Ukraine, just for students, basically considers that alleging that there is a genocide in Ukraine as a pretext to invade that territory is in itself a violation of the Genocide Convention. So Ukraine saying you are using false allegations about a violation of the convention to attack us, and this is correct. And as such, that is a violation of the convention. I don't know if this is correct or not. There is a pending case. We are at the preliminary objection phase. Basically, Russia is saying the court has no jurisdiction. But it's important that we had on 16th of March, an order on provisional measures, interim measures, in which the court said that the acts undertaken by a state to prevent and to punish genocide must be taken in conformity with the spirit and aims of the United Nations, and it's doubtful that the convention authorizes unilateral use of force to prevent and punish genocide. It is doubtful. The language is extremely cautious because we are at the stage of the provisional measures. Clearly, this will be the core of one of the core issues once and if the case reaches the merits stage. So this was just the introduction in the sense that we are talking about the legal boundaries of this duty to prevent genocide. The starting point was 15 years ago, Bosnia versus Serbia case. The court said a state has the duty to prevent genocide from occurring in another territory, but we don't know. The court didn't tell us what states could have done. There are lots of questions unanswered. There were lots of questions unanswered. These questions became far more pressing after Russia used these allegations to justify the launch of its act of aggression against Ukraine. So what I'm trying to do in the rest of the time I have with you today is exploring some legal issues pertaining to this extraterritorial duty to prevent genocide. I will focus mainly on two of them. The first is the one everybody wants to talk about, is can a state use armed force to prevent a genocide? The second is what can be done by a state to prevent a genocide without resorting to the use of force. And finally, if I have time, I have some technical lawyerish considerations on when, in reality, a violation of this duty occurs, because I think the court in 2007 got it wrong. This is less maybe exciting for the wider public. So, I believe that in 2007, the ICJ should have been more straightforward in saying what a state is demanded to do to prevent a genocide from occurring in another territory cannot be a violation of the rules on the use of force in the UN Charter. For students, if you are not aware of this, the UN Charter only permits unilateral use of force in self-defense under Article 51. No other unilateral use of armed force is permitted. Then we can elaborate on this and saying that a state has the right to invite another state to use force in its own territory, intervention upon invitation. But that is not, I would say, an exception to the ban of the use of force, because it's not a use of force done in a hostile way. There is the consent of the state. But when there is no consent of the victim state, or the state against which force is used, armed force can only be used in self-defense. The problem is that this principle has been considered for years to be too restrictive. And this was particularly clear in the 90s when states were unable to use armed force to prevent the genocides in Rwanda and Srebrenica in Bosnia. Because the system of the UN Charter was based on the ban of the use of force by states unilaterally, except self-defense, along with a centralized use of force by the UN Security Council that is not working well because of the veto power given to the permanent members. So without a functioning centralized system of the use of force, many states and commentators argued that the ban of the use of force except in self-defense doesn't allow to protect, for instance, civilians victims in an internal conflict. And in fact, we had the Rwandan and Bosnian genocides without any possibility for states to lawfully intervene and use armed force. The situation changed in 1999 when NATO states decided to use armed force in Kosovo, not in self-defense, not upon an authorization of the UN Security Council. That intervention was in principle unlawful. But states said we need to do that to protect human life. So in this context, when in 2007 Bosnia versus Serbia case was decided, there was a strong trend favoring the possibility of using armed force in extreme situations to protect civilians, to save their lives, to halt mass atrocities. This was all the debate about the national humanitarian intervention. This was all the debate about the responsibility to protect. And it is clear that the 2007 decision is the product of this atmosphere, I would say. And it's clear not because I'm a very good investigator. It's clear because one of the judges at the International Court of Justice, Judge Sima, some years after, wrote a chapter in his scholarly capacity saying that decision was our contribution to responsibility to protect. So 2007, the court didn't say clearly you cannot use armed force in violation of the UN Charter to prevent a genocide. However, I think that at the moment, we don't have a uniform state practice opinio juris, the two elements of customary international law, to affirm that a state can use armed force outside the UN Charter to prevent a genocide. And the Russian aggression against Ukraine in this regard is quite interesting because the Russian government affirmed that they invaded Ukraine to prevent a genocide, but as a legal basis, they invoked the self-defense. This demonstrates that they didn't think that the prevention of genocide was an autonomous legal basis. But from a technical legal point of view, the duty to prevent a genocide is a primary rule of international law, is a rule that states must respect. And in international law, we don't recognize the fact that a state can violate an international obligation, in this case, the ban on the use of force, to implement another international obligation, in this case, the duty to prevent a genocide. So there is nothing in international law like comparable to what happens in certain domestic legal systems that say a state in pursuance of an obligation can violate the law. So logically speaking, the duty to prevent genocide cannot trump, from an international legal perspective, the ban on the use of armed force. So my position is that we should not recognize any legality of humanitarian intervention. First of all, because there is no basis in the law, and the duty to prevent a genocide is not such a basis, for the reasons I said, and also because it's extremely dangerous in political discourse. World War II was started by Adolf Hitler under the pretext to intervene in neighboring countries to protect the German minorities. So there was no genocide concept at the time, but more or less that was their reasoning. So, you know, it's a notion that can be manipulated. So which is my position? Yeah, the duty to prevent a genocide is a duty. States must do something to prevent a genocide from occurring in another territory, but they must adopt different measures, non-forcible measures, measures that don't violate the ban on the use of force. And this is what the UN has as in the last 15 years recognized in relation to the idea of the responsibility to protect. It's a good idea. States must do whatever they can, and the UN must do whatever it can to protect people from atrocities, but without using armed force. So which is the content, in my opinion, of the duty to prevent a genocide? At the very bare minimum, states must refrain from providing any assistance to the state that is suspected of committing, sorry, this coming in the slides, is committing or being about to commit a genocide. This is a very low threshold. It's not the threshold that is required by the Articles on State Responsibility, in particular Article 16, for the notion of complicity. Simply, if there is a serious allegation that a genocide is committed, is prepared by a state, all the other states should not assist in any way that state. It's a minimum negative content of the duty to prevent genocide. But the bulk of the measures are positive duties upon the states. States must do something in relation to that situation. The first thing, and what I believe, is that states must undertake measures to put pressure upon the state that is suspected to be about to commit a genocide. But these measures should be lawful measures under international law. Remember, the duty to prevent a genocide is not an excuse. So they should undertake what is technically called a retortion, and lawful but unfriendly act that a state can adopt to compel another state to comply with international law. There is an array of measures we can think about: the suspension of diplomatic relations, the invocation of international responsibility, bringing the situation before the UN, adopting permitted forms of economic pressure, lots of things that all the states have a duty to undertake to make the other state not commit genocide. I also believe that the other states can violate certain rules of international law to make the state that is suspected of being committing a genocide comply with its obligations. These are countermeasures. Countermeasures are unlawful acts that nevertheless are considered to be lawful because they are proportionate responses to a prior violation. But the relationship between the duty to prevent a genocide and countermeasure should be structured as follows. A state is free to adopt countermeasures, but if that state has a duty to prevent a genocide from occurring in another country, the first state has a duty to adopt countermeasures against the state that is suspected of committing genocide. So you see, I'm very much in favor of saying states must do something. It's not just left to politics. They have a duty to do something to prevent a genocide from occurring in another territory. What I'm saying is that this cannot involve invading that state. So I know what my students will say, I know what you are thinking, or you are being very vague, you are not providing us with any example. I think we have recently a quite a good example of best practices in this field, and it's given by the case law of the International Court of Justice, in particular by the case of the Gambia versus Myanmar. It's another of my favorite cases. Just to be quite quick, as you may know, in Myanmar, there is a situation in which there are serious allegations that a genocide is going on. The government is committing, probably, allegedly, a genocide against the Rohingya minority. And in 2019, the Gambia, geographically speaking, a country that is very far from Myanmar, brought Myanmar before the International Court of Justice, invoking the responsibility of Myanmar for the violation of the convention, the Genocide Convention. Myanmar tried to deny any standing for the Gambia, alleging that the Gambia has nothing to do with that situation. But the court recognized that the Genocide Convention embodies community interests, what we call the erga omnes partes obligation. So even all the states parties to the convention can bring a case before the ICJ, and the case is pending. So we have at the moment a case before the International Court of Justice in which the Gambia invokes responsibility of Myanmar for the Rohingya genocide. So from the standpoint of the International Court of Justice procedure, Gambia had no duty to invoke the responsibility of Myanmar. That was just a choice. So the Gambia had a right, a faculty of invoking responsibility, but no duty. But if we assess this from the perspective of the duty to prevent a genocide, we can see that the Gambia is implementing its duty to prevent a genocide from occurring in Myanmar by bringing Myanmar before a competent court. So if we want to transplant this in the scenario between Ukraine and Russia, Russia invaded Ukraine saying we are there to prevent a genocide from occurring. There is no evidence whatsoever that there was a genocide in Ukraine going on. But in any case, if Russia had serious concerns regarding this, Russia should have adopted non-forcible measures, could have, for instance, brought Ukraine before the International Court of Justice to assess whether there was a genocide in preparation or going on. So we have, I think, cases of best practice. Okay, I checked the timing. I think I can say a couple words more on another topic. So in general, I think that the 2007 decision on the Bosnia versus Serbia case needs some clarification to avoid the perception of double standards, to avoid manipulations. And the biggest one is we should clarify that you cannot invade a state with the pretext you are preventing a genocide. What a state should do is adopting non-forcible measures. There are other secondary issues with that decision, in particular the fact that the court said that the violation of the duty to prevent a genocide materializes only if a genocide occurs. This is incorrect, because the court said that the obligation to prevent a genocide is a due diligence obligation. A state should just demonstrate it was diligent in trying to prevent a genocide. And so the focus of the obligation is not on whether the genocide occurred or not, but the focus is on whether the state acted in a diligent way. So even if there is no genocide in a certain situation, the duty to prevent a genocide has can be violated, because it has a preventive function. It doesn't focus on whether there is or not a genocide. That is the duty not to commit genocide. That is the duty to punish genocide. It focuses on what other states should do in a preventive way to avoid that the genocide materializes. But if you want, I can say something more of this very technical issue in a while. So my conclusions. The 2007 decision, Bosnia versus Serbia, saying that states have a duty to prevent a genocide from occurring in another territory, is a good decision, in the sense that I like the idea that states have a responsibility for genocide prevention, even if this doesn't affect their territory or their citizens. Think about serious allegations of genocide of the Uyghurs in China. Under this decision, states cannot just pretend not to know that those allegations exist. So there is a duty of being engaged for the protection of vulnerable groups at the international level. However, I think that the decision should be this notion of the genocide prevention should be described in an accurate way to avoid that it is manipulated, to avoid that it is that it demonstrates double standards. At the time in which the Bosnia versus Serbia case was decided, that decision was very controversial, because the entire international community considered that Serbia was directly responsible for the genocide of Srebrenica. Where the court had to stick with its previous case law when the conduct of an armed group is attributable to the state. So it was difficult for the ICJ to attribute that genocide to the state of Serbia. And to circumvent this problem, the court said that the genocide is not attributable to Serbia, but Serbia is responsible for lack of prevention. So we have to avoid that this is just, this duty to prevent the genocide is just a tool created by the court to find Serbia's responsibility for Srebrenica. I think it was a good thing. And we should try to transplant this legal principle in clear ways to other situations like the Myanmar, like China. At the same time, we should clarify the content of this duty, I repeat for the 25th time, without any problem, to avoid states to violate the ban on the use of force with the pretext to prevent a genocide. I had this opinion already before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and the fact that President Vladimir Putin invoked the prevention of genocide as one of the goals of the aggression is evidence that we need such clarifications. A good, if we can say, good side of the discourse is that the issue is again in the docket, in the hands of the International Court of Justice, and maybe 15 years after that good but incomplete decision, we will have some clarifications. So I think I will stop here. I welcome any question or any comment. It was a technical presentation, so I'm more than happy to give clarifications. If you want to know more on what I think on this topic, I published widely on this topic. So you can find here on the screen which are my publications on this topic, and they are all freely available through SSRN and academia.edu. Thank you again. I will stop sharing the screening, and I look forward to your comments. Thanks.
Marco, thank you very much for your very interesting discussion. We have Itamar and Amnon on the list, and the rest of you, if anybody wants to ask comment, please make a sign in the chat. Itamar, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marco, for the presentation. I guess the question is rather standard in this area, I think, and nevertheless, I think you only touched upon it in passing. And it is often discussed, and it was discussed in the Libya intervention, and I think in the, in many interventions in the past, that there's an aspect of an intervention being justified but not legal. And you kind of, I think, brush that away, saying this is kind of not a question that I need to answer as a lawyer. I'm going to focus on the sources. And that's the way I understood you. But then, if we try to formulate in a lawyerly way, one can ask whether there is a defense of necessity. If there is a breach in terms of a military defense to prevent genocide, if the state that has committed the violation can then raise a defense of necessity of some kind. And obviously that is also an issue that has been discussed very often with regard to other violations as well. And if the answer is no, then is international law here not very, very problematic? And what are the enforcement mechanisms that are really available? You did mention a couple, but it's not clear that international law would be helpful in preventing genocide, but rather it seems like in some cases it would deter that aspect of prevention in reality. So as I said, I think these are a number of kind of basic points, but maybe they're good as a beginning.
Okay, my audio is on. Thank you, Itamar. I'm very happy about your questions because I had to go quickly, and so now I can have all the pretext to say what I want to say. Just a comment on one word you said. I don't have any problem with intervention in Libya. From a very positivistic point of view, that was authorized by the UN Security Council in 2011. So that, I think, is the model that should work in principle. The Security Council takes into account the need to protect, that was from crimes against humanity and war crimes, but genocide, and authorizes the use of force. The problem there is what happened after the authorization was launched, not before the authorization, when the intervention started. So it was a problem how it was conducted. It wasn't a problem on can we lawfully conduct it, if that makes sense. But the issue is the issue with Kosovo. We go back to the old issues that international lawyers faced with Kosovo. Let's assume at today's debate that in Kosovo there was a humanitarian crisis that required help. For instance, Russia denies this and clearly Serbia denies this. What could have we done? So for the people in the audience after Kosovo, there were a number of scholars who had good ideas. I think Itamar alluded to the conclusions of Richard Goldstone that the intervention was unlawful but legitimate. That honestly, I struggle to find a lawyer able to describe what this means. It looks like, in my opinion, a way to endorse a breach of international law. I don't have any problem in this if states accept the consequences of this. If states saying, we decided to violate international law, we accept the consequence. Okay, there was a good reason for violating international law in this case. I have more problems in trying to figure out how that would not be unlawful. The second author was said about Kosovo, and this is very important for our students here, my students, if there is any of them, was Antonio Cassese, who wrote an article, the extremely famous article in European Journal of International Law, saying, I think there is a developing customary international exception to the ban of the use of force allowing humanitarian intervention. In less than 1 year, the European Journal of International Law published a follow-up by Antonio Cassese saying, no, I got it wrong. So guys, students, don't be in a rush to publish your stuff without you have thought it very well. Because Cassese realized that there was a huge backlash from non-Western states against that intervention. That article is very little cited as the same title, the first one, Follow Up. And he realized that it risked manipulation. A further scholar that I'm very happy to mention, is not very famous abroad, Paolo Picone, who is an Italian genius writing almost entirely in Italian, said that this, in a very sophisticated way, that this was a form of a lawful countermeasures for a serious violation of obligations erga omnes partes. He said, as when there is such a violation of the ban on the use of force, the victim state can react in self-defense or ask other states to react in self-defense. All the international community have the possibility to use armed force when other rules, obligations erga omnes, he doesn't like use cogens, but that was his idea more or less, are violated. But this is not what international law, the way in which international law developed. So, we have to use the tools we have. I just will say the necessity defense, in my opinion, is not a valid point. Necessity is framed in an extremely restrictive way by Article 25 of the Articles on State Responsibility, finalized in 2001 by the International Commission. I don't think we are in that case. And by the way, no defense listed by the articles can be invoked to justify a violation of a jus cogens norm. And the ban on aggression, at least the ban on aggression, is a jus cogens norm. So, is international law not good enough for that? Probably, because international law should be taken as I try to say, a system, and there was a centralized functioning way to enforce international law that doesn't work, the UN Security Council. On the other hand, there are some colleagues these days that are writing excellent papers, I envy them, on the inherent evil of aggression. So I wonder whether an aggression launched to prevent a genocide, for all the inherent consequences of that aggression, could ever in any case be justified. And these colleagues focus on all the consequences of an act of aggression that usually are below the radar of international law, because, for instance, they're not, they don't result in a violation of the law armed conflict. So, you know, I still believe that they can be inadequate, maybe, but non-forcible measures are the best response. So I would have liked to see all the so-called sanctions that the Western states adopted against Russia. They are not sanctions, they are countermeasures, technically, even if states don't want to admit that. I would have liked to see that those sanctions against Myanmar. There was something, there was too little. It's difficult to see that, but I would have liked to see them against China for the Uyghurs situation, or in other similar cases. So overall, we are between, literally between different evils. But I thought already in the past that there was an evil, that there was a way to manipulate this duty. And unfortunately, and very sad, I think that Vladimir Putin was very eager to demonstrate that I was right with that. But clearly, they are not easy issues.
Amnon, your turn.
Okay, thank you for this very interesting analysis. And I think I want to follow on Itamar's footsteps in a way. So I think your critique could be understood on three levels. On a conceptual level, and here you ask actually two questions. What is a duty, and how does the duty fit with contravailing duties? And your suggestion is, yes, you do have a duty, provided that you don't violate other duties. And then you expound on that. That's a conceptual point. And then there's a question of the primacy of duties, which, and then the reaction to this is, isn't the prevention of genocide just more important than other duties, or because if you kill several millions of people because of their whatever ethnic or some other affiliations, if a state does that, or an entity does that, and then in order to prevent that, you have to violate something else, then the question is, okay, what's at stake here? And then to this you answered, Itamar, in a way that aggression may be wrong per se, but if aggression is wrong per se, shouldn't we all be, at the end of the day, including the UN Security Council, just pacifist? Because killing people is wrong at the end of the day. Even if you take this logic, you should just say, in any event, you should say all aggression is bad, and you don't distinguish between some aggression and other aggression, even though it could be the case. The genocide is just simply more serious or more harmful. So that's the point on duties. Then you have a point that says your second point is it has to do with manipulation, the ability to manipulate, and Putin manipulated. And you're right, Putin manipulated. But that raises a question on whether we design the law, the rule, in such a way that fears manipulation. And then you have to design laws that are manipulation proof. And if you can manipulate the law, the rule is bad. Or whether we should say, okay, there should be a rule that deals with manipulation. For example, you have to have credible evidence. There has to be a preliminary stage of and that includes the entire issue of procedure. So suppose I totally agree with you that it shouldn't be the first step or the first move that states fulfill the duty against genocide or to prevent genocide. The first move shouldn't be to invade another state. They should exhaust others. But if others do not work, then maybe they should say, okay, I have this evidence, I applied to this body, but the genocide is still going on. They cannot say, oh, you know what, I just, I will not exchange tourist groups with you. Tourism will be affected as long as you conduct genocide. I'm sorry about that, but that's the best I can do, right? So, but you see my point, and that is the point of exhausting other in order to prevent manipulation. Aren't there better tools to prevent manipulation than just saying there shouldn't be a duty, including a duty to? And the third point I want you raise, and I think it's an important point, and I think you must address this, is the question of what are the real consequences? It follows on the manipulation. You seem to imply that it's more likely that this rule will be manipulated than actually applied according to its purpose. And I wonder about that. Because if you should apply at least the same standard to your proposal. If your proposal, which is, well, you take the state, the violating state, you take it to an international court, if it agrees to the jurisdiction or not, or if there is jurisdiction, you take it to a court, you apply economic countermeasures. Will it help? And I think this was Itamar's point. I think if at the end of the day, the reality test is that those jurisdictions that are willing to exterminate another, to exercise, to engage in genocide, you have to. If they say, okay, they will take me to the Court of Hague, they will do some countermeasures. Fine, I'll deal with it. It's more important. From the state perspective, it's more important that I kill this ethnicity or whatever. So the impact or the effect of the rule on the ground should be examined. And here I think that if a state can say, look, I've exhausted. It goes to my previous point. The second say I exhausted other, but it's simply there's no response, and I have evidence, I have credible evidence that the genocide is still going on, because it's worth it for the other jurisdiction to violate. I think it's a pretty poor answer to say, oh, but I'm worried that it will be manipulated in other instances, so therefore I don't allow you to to intervene. Now, here's my final point. These were your 3 points in my reaction to your 3 points. My my contribution perhaps to this is to view it from a slightly different perspective, and that is the perspective of the relationship between aggression and sovereignty. And here I'm not saying anything new, but you could say that the whole idea of you cannot violate the territorial integrity of another state presupposes that the sovereignty of that other state is used in a manner that is consistent with international law. So sovereignty itself is a component of international law, and because of your right, it has to be an inherent consistent system. But if I use my sovereignty in a way to kill my own citizens and exercise genocide on my own citizens or residents or whatever, and then I say to others, but you have to respect my sovereignty, there is some sort of a contradiction in terms there. Maybe I lose my claim. I'm stopped from raising my sovereignty claim when I use my sovereignty in a way that so contradicts international law. And to view differently, a state that then, after exhausting all other venues, breaches the integrity, the sovereign integrity, and saves, in good faith, not as a manipulation, in good faith, saves the Muslims in Kosovo or whatever, is at least, it has a shield against the international community by saying, I did that because there was a failure by others. The Security Council didn't interact, the other didn't. So I had to do that. And therefore, I'm shielded if you want to prosecute me. Because of this notion of estoppel that goes both ways. And of course, it will be decided ex post. And if you couldn't provide the evidence that you exhausted all other remedies and there was real genocide going on, then you would lose. But if you could, it sounds to me like a good defense. So if a state actually had intervened in Nazi Germany and saved the Jews, I think it would have been a pretty good defense for that state to say, look, all other systems failed and I had to do it. Please don't see me as an aggressor under these circumstances. So this is my intervention.
Thank you very much. It was rich. It was interesting. I don't want to give the idea because of the timing that I was assigned that these are easy questions. So I have some reactions to what to say. I have to say that in the past, it was 2013, at a wonderful summer school in Florence, there was an important colleague making more or less the argument I'm making now. I was outraged. I was younger. I said, no, we should allow the use of force to save human lives. He replied, it's because you are young, you will change your mind. And honestly, it happened. I always say this story because it always happened. It happened. So what you say is, no. First of all, in international law, we not recognize any primacy of a duty. We recognize primacy over certain rules, what is jus cogens, but this time, the ban on aggression and the genocide obligations, let's say it's a bit more complex, have the same rank. I go immediately to your last example that I think it was in the background of your mind. It's exactly what I think we, the states, say there is a mad person, Adolf Hitler, doing this, we intervene, we don't care if we were not attacked, we live with the consequences. I totally agree. I would have done that. And I think at that point that there would not have been any international condemnation. However, what you say in other scenarios has raised lots of concerns. So for the audience, I think that Amnon was alluding to the concept of responsibility to protect. After Kosovo in 2001, a group of Canadian scholars say, listen, we are not talking anymore about humanitarian intervention, we're talking about responsibility to protect. In the notion of sovereignty, there is responsibility. If the state doesn't protect its own citizens, the responsibility falls back on the UN. If the Security Council doesn't take the responsibility falls back to the General Assembly. If the General Assembly doesn't do anything, even states unilaterally can act in the name of the international community. That, by the way, was in other terms what Paolo Piccone had said for years. This Canadian proposal, 2001, was very controversial. In fact, in 2005, I alluded to this, the UN endorsed the General Assembly, the World Summit outcome, endorsed the national responsibility to protect, and in the specific paragraphs that I usually show to my students, all the states in the world, the General Assembly said clearly, this must be done within the boundaries of international law, within the boundaries of the UN Charter, within the responsibilities attributed to UN bodies, not outside. It was tamed. And then this resulted in the intervention in Libya that had the sanctioning of the UN Security Council. This tells us that states don't trust unilateral decisions. Let's say that if you, not you as a person, if you as a state, believe you are on the right side, it's easy to say, I'm in good faith. I'm doing this in good faith. I will say two very provocative examples. Please don't be triggered. There are allegations that there is a genocide of Palestinians by Israel. I'm sure in Iran, some people believe this. It's not my position. I'm sure in Iran, some people believe this, or in other countries. What would you do if they say, in good faith, we are launching an aggression against Israel to prevent that genocide? There will be an uproar, rightly so, rightly so. So you see how easily is manipulated the argument.
But
let me finish, please. You know who is the only person before the invasion of Ukraine who invoked the responsibility to protect a lack of sovereignty to intervene militarily? It's not Vladimir Putin. It's Sergei Lavrov, who justified in the TV the 2006 aggression against Georgia with the occupation of two areas in Georgia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, saying this is an application responsibility to protect. There are people there, Russian people there that are under attack. We are implementing a responsibility to protect under the UN Charter. That it wasn't true because there was no UN sanctioning. They were Russians, or this current Russian leadership, have always been very happy about responsibility to protect. So you say, we need a monitoring mechanism, but we have that. Even Security Council. What I'm saying is not that aggression is always bad. I'm saying that sometimes the use of force is necessary. What states did after World War II was giving this dramatic decision to a body. The body didn't work. It's the UN Security Council. It's paralyzed by veto. We can work about how to remove. We can think about how to remove that, reforms. There are projects. I'm not saying it's easy. But when we tried to say, let's put a body to decide these urgent issues, it's nothing new. It's what it is here now. And this is why there is the veto. We put the 5 most powerful states at the time, not now, to have to agree that really there is a case to intervene because there is a good faith effort to do something. It happened in Libya. It happened in Kuwait during the first Gulf War. It's not a working system. So I don't think it's that easy to identify create such a good faith monitoring mechanism. I would like just to add that in the lost responsibility for the possibility to take these countermeasures, something like that has been suggested by the one before the last special rapporteur on state responsibility, Gaetano Aranjo Ruiz. He said, let's create a link between these violations and the Security Council and General Assembly, or even better, the International Court of Justice, that says there is this violation, you can take countermeasures. States went mad. The states rejected this. They said these are decisions that must be taken quickly. We cannot stage a trial before the ICJ. So I go back to my point. It's not, in my opinion, an easy issue. What I'm saying that I was very enthusiastic in 2007 about this decision, the duty to prevent a genocide in another country. I think we must be accurate in saying what can be done and what cannot be done to avoid manipulations. I'm not saying that states should pretend that this is not a duty. Rather, in my scholarship on when the breaches occur, on the nature of the breach, what I'm saying is a state is responsible for lack of prevention. What I'm saying is, if there is a genocide and state decides not to do anything, that's a violation. That's a social responsibility. Even if it's not an obligation of result, it's an obligation of conduct. So, final point, I think sanctions sometimes are effective. Sanctions, along with other things, brought down the apartheid regime in South Africa. It was a slow process, but it worked at the end of the day. And as far as I know, no states seriously said we should invade South Africa. And I don't know what you think, but I don't think that saying there is such an horrible regime in South Africa, we should launch a military operation to change that. It would have been the worst thing I've seen in the last 40 years. It was a pretty horrible situation. And it was brought down with other measures. But again, I apologize if this sounds that I have easy answers. I don't have easy answers at all. So probably it's not, as Itamar said, just a question for lawyers. At a certain point, law is just a tool. We can say it's not the best tool. We accept that we are doing something outside the boundaries of the law for other reasons. But I think just states should go there and saying, we accept this responsibility. Okay, I give back.
Thank you, Marco. We have some other questions, so I think we should move forward. Limor, your turn.
Really, I just actually said that I'm passing because my question was more or less in the lines of Amnon. So Marco, I agree with, so it was very convincing what you presented. And but then just so as I'm saying that I'm passing in a way, I will just say that it seems that the gap between the two things that seems at question is too big. So on the one hand, you're in favor of the duty. And on the other hand, you say we have a problem with the Security Council, and you say, okay, I don't have anything else. And I don't think that the apartheid regime is the same, because if we're talking about a genocide that is occurring like in Rwanda or like in Bosnia, so we need some much more immediate actions. So we don't have the time, although the apartheid regime was horrible and what the occupation is doing is horrible, Israeli occupation, I mean. So, and I think that the example that you were giving with Iran, I think it's a good one for us as Israelis, right? Good, so it's to the point. But then still I'm thinking whether we can find something that is better. That it's not like saying, okay, we don't have anything else because the Security Council is blocked. And on the other hand, we do not only rely on unilateral actions. So somehow within legal actions or with the General Assembly and other, so in line with what Amnon said, but too long to say. Yeah, thanks.
I totally agree. I think I totally agree with everything you said. It's not my position that we should say there is nothing. I'm saying there is something, but not involving the use of force. It's my problem with my students. They want always to find a justification to use some force. And the UN works a lot on these other aspects. at the institutional level, clearly. And then sanctions work, what we call sanctions, for instance, in relation to Russia, from a unilateral perspective. So I'm not saying to do nothing. I'm just saying that you can do everything almost except launching a war aggression. Because if we give this as the bottom line, we end up with something like Ukraine. Somebody said, see, it's easy. I just say there is a genocide there, and invade the country.
May I have a counter comment, maybe, Eli, or if not?
Yeah, sure.
I'm just saying that, like you, as Amnon said, like, or you said, like that, there will always, for the villains, there will always be an excuse, right? If it will not be this one, it will be self-protection. There will be something, right? So we are more concerned with deterring the ones that actually want to do good, right? So they have the civil disobedience option, right? Okay, like saying we want to do good, we know that it's illegal, but we will do it anyway, and we're willing to take the risk. But we're dealing with the situation with anyway, states don't want to do that, right? Like the burden of something towards their local population, okay, they have this burden of proving that what they're going to do is actually justified. So it's like bringing another burden on those states. And again, it's not that I'm not so anxious to see states intervening and using force, but just thinking about those specific extreme conditions that anyway, we see states reluctant to do anything. So
maybe I'll follow up Amnon and Limor and be the devil's advocate and ask exactly the opposite question. If there is a duty to interfere when there is a genocide, you cannot do it by invasion, but you have to react. Does it mean that all the countries of the world violate, save Gambia, let's say, that took measures against Myanmar, all the other countries of the world violated international law because they didn't do anything about Myanmar? So maybe the whole notion of such a duty, if it's, you know, not being followed by all the countries, even from a jurisprudential perspective, you know, a law that is not acted upon by so many countries so long time is not a law anymore. So maybe exactly there is no such duty.
Thank you very much, Eli. I just want to repeat that I totally agree with Limor. I totally agree with Limor. I'm not defending the current structure of international law as a good force. There are huge problems. There are excellent works of scholars trying to argue that certain actions of the Security Council are lawful, that certain states under the duty to prevent a genocide should not vote in a certain way in the Security Council. I'm just saying what is, in my opinion, the current structure of international law that is determined by states. And I'm saying that I'm very scared about a state that say, okay, I'm the good guy, self-declared the good guy, I go to invade another state. Again, this was my opinion before the Russian invasion. Now I think the argument is even easier. I would like to add that there is, in my memory, I'm quite young, no intervention, armed intervention, violation of international law that politically resulted in a good way. We are all regretting what happened in Iraq. We are all regretting what happened in Afghanistan. We are all regretting what happened in Libya, even if in principle was lawful. So, but this is maybe another discussion. Eli, you asked a wonderful question. I didn't have time, clearly. The court in 2007 clarified that the duty to prevent a genocide is not equal for all the states in the world, but it depends on specific circumstances. In particular, it depends on the degree of influence that the state has on the people responsible for the genocide. In the case of Srebrenica, since the armed group, I don't remember the name, was funded by Serbia, was created by Serbian nationals, there were lots of links at political level between the armed group and the Serbian state. Serbia bear the first responsibility to prevent the genocide. my work in this field goes towards the idea that we should be very careful and try to reinforce, to stress when a state has this kind of influence, to make that state responsible, because these are what in international law we call due diligence obligations of conduct. They are less enforceable than obligations of result, but they are nevertheless obligations. We cannot say they are not obligations. Under international law, they are framework obligations. So thank you for giving me the possibility to clarify this point. I will make a very stupid example. As you may know, there is a state within Italy that is called San Marino. It's a town state in Italy. If San Marino tomorrow decides to commit a genocide, I'm sure that we can argue that the first state in violation of the duty to prevent genocide was Italy. Because we were there, we are there physically, we have strong connections, we speak the same language, we should have been aware that a genocide was about to occur or was going on. And I think, on the other hand, that the duty to prevent genocide is an interesting tool. Because so far, states, what they are doing is, oh, we don't know if there is a genocide. Without awareness, you cannot consider us to be complicit in that genocide. State responsibility requires a certain degree of awareness and a certain contribution to the commission of the wrongful act. Okay, but the duty to prevent that wrongful act has a lower threshold. It is enough that you have serious, I put in the slide, I don't find now the ICJ language, that's credible allegations that the state should say, you are a pariah, I cannot have anything to do with you. And I think this has potential, honestly. I think this has potential. Somebody before asked, I don't remember whom, is genocide that evil, the crime of crime, that it should be treated differently in international? In fact, there is nothing so robust, there is something, but nothing so robust for the duty to prevent war crimes or the duty to prevent crimes against humanity. And unfortunately, the duty to prevent aggression. We have certain mechanisms we can talk on Article 1 of the Geneva Conventions, I think can have a similar function. There is a duty to prevent torture, but there is not this big emphasis as in the case of the duty to prevent genocide. Okay, I don't know if I just reacted, but I stress it's not an easy question, and it is one of those fault lines where the fragility of international law is more evident. Okay, I give back the floor. You are muted.
Thank you for your answer, and the next in line is Robert, please.
Hi. First of all, Marco, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Indeed, it's one of these cases that legal analysis gets you somewhere which sometimes against your feelings, your heart, and your guts, and basically, I agree with that analysis. 2 points I wanted to ask. First, as you say, indeed, states are making and they are the makers of international law, and I, in a way, I'm looking at R2P, humanitarian intervention, and the duty to prevent genocide. That's somewhere on the same line of intervention. And while you were lecturing, I was looking into the British justification to intervene in Syria. Into the actually a legal paper almost, as you say, you could say that would raise 3 points as it would justify that this intervention. And my question is whether things have changed, and more and more countries, states, the US also explained it as in a way that intervening in that use of chemical weapons at that time. So we're seeing a body of states that are accepting some kind of intervention. That's kind of an interesting development. And my second question or point is you're referring to countermeasures. Now, countermeasures if I recall correctly, are allowed only by the injured state. Okay, and basically, if you're saying that every state is an injured state in that case that can use countermeasures, in a way, you're opening the door in the same way, mutatis mutandis, to the genocide, because you're allowing maybe the same argument will be raised not only in genocide, but in other cases to justify states acting against international law, saying that we have the duty to act, or we are allowed to act under this countermeasures exception at the end of it. So that's also dangerous on the same line. So are we sacrificing one principle in international law in order to save somewhere that international law just brings us to an unacceptable response in some cases? Because like I'm example of the Holocaust, there are some cases that are you would say that the legal response is insufficient. So are you sacrificing one thing to get to some kind of response to another? Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Two very interesting points. Yeah, I repeat that international law is a human thing. You cannot go to the beach and meet international law. So it's just a human tool. It has lots of limitations. UK justification. You reinforce my point. There was a debate in UK about responsibility to protect. The UK was very supportive about this idea. Then I recall for the audience what happened in 2013. The Syrian regime started an horrible civil war with its opposition. At the time we called it opposition. And the Western states wanted to support the opposition. Barack Obama, US president, said we have a duty to intervene, but Russia was blocking with veto. So if you remember, Barack Obama visited the different countries. He wanted to use armed force against Syria, pursuant to responsibility to protect, siding with the opposition. The British Prime Minister, David Cameron, said that this was a great idea. The UK had to join in this action for responsibility to protect, brought this idea before the British Parliament. The British Parliament, his majority, rejected it. That is the end of any legal discourse on responsibility to protect in this country. The government went immediately back to call it a humanitarian intervention. Why? Because after Libya, the responsibility to protect that was used to create a regime change and not to protect the population had acquired a very bad reputation. And I think that point in which the US, the hegemonic state, wanted to go against Syria, didn't go against Syria, is the tipping point in which the support for these kinds of idea, responsibility to protect, halted. Because Russia said very clearly, you intervene in Syria, we react in collective self-defense. This is unlawful. And I think that for the assessment of customary international law is extremely interesting. And I wonder which is now the opinion juris of the UK on the point, the opinion juris of the government at the time, or the opinion juris of the parliament. I would like then to add that 1 year after we found out that some of the rebels against the Syrian government were what today we call the Islamic State. So it's always a very delicate situation. But yes, UK and US are back to the old idea of humanitarian intervention. Then, Robert, honestly, if we consider two only states representative of the international community from the global north, very similar traditions, I think this is debatable. Countermeasures, totally agree. You got my point. I don't know you, but I'm sure you are a lawyer. There is this idea that countermeasures can only be undertaken by the states that the state that is the victim state. But in the field of some specific measures, some specific obligations of international law that are particularly important, all the states of the international community, or at least all the states party at a certain treaty, are affected states, and then they can react. This is what happens when we have violations, obligations, erga omnes partes. As a matter of countermeasures, Article 54 of the Articles on State Responsibility, finalized by James Crawford in the International Law Commission 2001, is silent. But this is the only legal way to justify measures adopted outside the Security Council authorization and in violation of international law in relation to Libya, in relation to Syria, in relation to now Russia. Because they are violations of international law. I am violating, Europe is violating treaties with Syria, with Russia. How could this be lawful? For me, it's perfectly lawful, because all the states in the international community have interest in compliance with the ban on aggression, the ban on war crimes, the ban on crimes against humanity, that are the rules that Russia is violating today in relation to Ukraine. Is it open to manipulation? Yes. I'm concerned that this is open to manipulation. I'm less concerned about this. I think sanctions of this kind of countermeasures have effects, but for sure they have less dramatic effects than invading another country. But yes, again, this is a delicate topic, because I think most international lawyers today will tell you these are countermeasures. No state has articulated these measures as countermeasures. Those states don't like the idea. So we are in this gray zone in which states are violating international law in response to the Russian aggression, and they don't say why. Oh, we have a European Union decision. Yeah, from an international point of view, that's totally irrelevant. It's the UN, and no, so you cannot do that. But it's part of the diplomatic debate these days.
Thank you, Marco. I think that this was a really very interesting session, which also shows, for those of us who are not from international law, and most of us are not from international law, is that the discourses are very different. And when you want to adopt an international law discourse, I think this was your main point, Marco, you have to look on the law from the perspective of all sides. It's not only our perspective on law and how it should be implemented. So thank you very much for your talk. We will convene next week for our second seminar. And I want to wish everyone a nice weekend, and again, a successful opening of the new academic year.
Thank you to everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Marco. Bye.